We got Steve Rudman, so that's a good start. Hey, Steve.
Man,
Kind of waiting for our, waiting to get critical mass here.
No, I'm in your general shock.
Oh, boy.
That's okay. I'm gonna end up being recorded today anyway. I have gone through my presentation once.
What's your normal routine? Twice?
I normally just talk about things I already know and I don't need a paper.
Yeah. That's usually a good strategy.
I normally drive my own talking points.
Yeah.
Are you muted on here?
I'm muted on there. I'm double muted. I'm muted on computer and I'm muted on
Oh
Zoom.
my gosh, so much muting.
I'm very muted.
Ultra muted. Hey, good to see you. You can sit at the table. I don't think,
Sit at the dais up there.
yeah.
Oh,
sit
there's- What's up, Monta?
I'm trying to think of how many people might come, but
afternoon.
Afternoon. We're working our way in slowly today. Seeing that it's you and Tim. Oh, we got Jesse and Vahid. Hello. Wait for a few more of our members to join. I know we have a number of people that aren't going to be here today, but certainly I'd like to see Mindy. So she's on the agenda.
helps it.
Yeah, she'd be helpful. Are we expecting these in person, you think?
I was here in person.
But Mindy and Maggie?
You know, I'm not totally sure about that.
What's up, Ebony? Who?
Maggie.
Oh, yeah, might as well. The wait?
We'll promote during the thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Mercedes.
Welcome, Mercedes. How many do we have total?
Thanks, Jess.
17? That seems like a lot.
How many people are on this thing?
15, right?
15?
15 is 30.
And 10 if
One missing?
people come?
Yeah, 5 people.
Well, we're not voting on anything, so we don't need a quorum. Because we're not voting.
Okay. Well, once our chair, co-chair settles in,
Okay.
we'll get going.
It certainly looks like August for a public meeting.
It's like what?
It looks like August important for a public meeting right now.
Absolutely.
Commissioner, I hope your time away was nice. Somewhat restful, I hope. Time away, at least. That's important.
I spent a few days in the original Paris and was in Edinburgh for a few days.
Oh, wow. I hear it's amazing in Edinburgh.
It's
It's plenty of people's favorite city that they've ever visited.
yeah, it's really great.
Oh, good for you. And so
Right.
much culture, too.
My uncle is in Edinburgh right now.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I've never been.
Fringe Festival right now, so.
Oh, it's the
there.
Fringe Festival right now?
Dublin is sponsored by the one.
Uh-huh. So he was telling me about that, yeah.
Huh.
My brother performed in the Fringe Festival once a few years ago. Yeah, he's an actor, yeah.
You come from a festival?
Okay, well, I'm a better actor than he is, but, you know, I chose this line of work instead, Commissioner.
This is where you do your acting? In the political arena?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks.
All right, what are we at? 4:05? Should we make it happen? Does everybody get their small talk? Little bits of small talk in? All right, shall we do it, folks? It is for, giving my eyes to all the people small talking. All right, well, it's 4:06. Let me welcome folks to the Tri-County Planning Body Meeting, August 9th, 2023. So welcome. We'll do some introductions, walk through our agenda, and just dive right in if that works for folks. Why don't I ask folks online to introduce themselves first? I'll go in the order that I see. Steve, can we start with you?
Good afternoon, everybody. Steve Rudman, he, him, member.
Thank you. Monta?
Good afternoon, everybody. Monta Knudsen. I'm the executive director over at Bridges to Change. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and just an FYI, I need to jump off at 5 for my organization's board meeting.
Great, thank you. Mercedes?
Hello, Mercedes Elizalde, use she and her pronouns, Director of Advocacy at Latino Network.
Great, I'm just gonna keep rolling with the folks online. Ebony, you're messing me up already. Counselor Lewis?
Christine Lewis, she and her pronouns, Metro Council District 2.
Great, thank you. Vahid?
Vahid Brown, he, him pronouns, Clackamas County Housing and Community Development.
Thank you. Brianna?
Hi, everyone. Brianna Flores, she, they pronouns, Multnomah County's SHS Team Program Supervisor.
Thank you. Jesse?
Hey everyone, Jesse Adams, she, her. I'm on the Homeless Services team on Washington County.
Great, and let's move to the room. Our co-chair, Ebony.
Ebony Brown, she, her pronouns, Executive Director, Greater Good Northwest, and I'll pass it to Sahan.
Don.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sahan McKelvey, he, him pronouns, Director of Community and Family Programs at SCI Self Enhancement, Inc. Glad to be here with all of you.
Great to see you. Mike?
Mike Liu, he, him pronouns with Fubon Shopping Center.
Great. Commissioner Jayapal?
Sushila Jayapal, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2, she, her pronouns.
Let's just keep rolling around. Giovanni?
Giovanni Bautista, he, him, his pronouns, Associate Housing Policy and Planning Coordinator with Metro. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Liam Frost, he, him, his pronouns, Assistant Director of Housing here at Metro, and it's nice to see all your faces again after skipping the last meeting.
Great, thank you. Ben Duncan, he, him pronouns, your facilitator.
I'm Abby Ahern. I'm a Senior Housing Policy and Planning Coordinator with Metro. Use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Mariella Dolan. I'm on the facilitation team with Crimson West.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, Mindy Statlander. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the CEO of HealthShare.
Thank you, Mindy.
Allie Alexander Sheridan, Washington County Homeless Services Team, she, her pronouns.
Thank you. Jess?
Good evening, Jess Larson with Washington County. Also, I use she and her pronouns.
Good. I think we have everyone. Who? Oh, yeah, Malia in the corner. Thank you.
Malia Dieters, Metro Housing, she, her pronouns.
And then Valeria, for folks that are in the room and don't see the chat, is in transit on her way, so she'll be here in 10 minutes. And Nicole Larson's on her way in. Nicole, I'll have you introduce yourself when you get here. And then just as a reminder, as Nicole's settling in, for folks that are using chat, make sure your settings are on everyone versus host and panelists. please. So Nicole, please.
Hi, everyone. Nicole Larson, she, her. I am the city liaison for Imago Dei Community and a licensed clinical social worker.
Great, thank you. Did I miss anyone? Okay, great. So just, we'll walk through the agenda and then I'll pass it to Ebony to approve our July meeting summary. So really today is a chance to spend some time getting grounded in some information that's really connected to the work that this group has done around our regional plan and really set a foundation for future discussion. So we'll get, we'll have a chance to have some public comment. I think we're gonna push staff updates towards later in the meeting when Valeria's here. We'll get an update and background on healthcare systems alignment, and then a presentation and overview of homeless services, data system and the ecosystem of the data that exists for homeless services. We will close and have next steps and get out of here by 6 p.m. Any questions about our agenda? Okay. Ebony, to you.
Motion to approve July's minutes.
So Ebony's making a motion. Do we have a second for the July meeting minute approval?
I'll second.
Commissioner Jayapal seconds. All those in favor of adopting the July meeting summary, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, not seeing any. The meeting summary is approved. So we're going to move to public comments. For those in the audience, I don't see anybody in person. Metro, did we get any written public comment? No? Okay. So this is a chance in our agenda to offer public comment. You'd be given up to 3 minutes to provide input to the Tri-County Planning Body. If there are folks in the audience, I don't see anybody on the phone. You can press *9 to raise your hand if you are in the audience, or just raise your hand. I am not seeing any. So last call for public comment. Please raise your hand. We'll promote you to a panelist if you'd like to offer input to the group. Not seeing any public comment for today. We will move.
Recording in progress.
We will move to record the meeting. And I think, Mindy, am I passing it to you?
We actually have Dr. Maggie Benton-Davis is in the audience.
Okay, so let's promote. So we'll have Dr. Was it Bennington Davis? Bennington Davis introduce themselves when they join.
I can do a little intro.
That'd be
Sorry,
great.
y'all. So the first item we have today is an update for you all on the healthcare system alignment goal that you all established a few months ago. The counties have been working really hard along with HealthShare and other partners in Metro to make progress on that goal. And today we're going to give you all an update on that. And so we have 3 presenters. And I'll have them introduce themselves as they present. So thank you so much, and take it away.
Who's starting?
And Malia, if you'll share the slides as they start.
Mindy, do you want me just to jump in?
I think they're all looking at you, Dr. Bennington Davis, so please.
All right, well, I've been promoted, now I'm being looked at, so it's pretty exciting. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I am gonna, let's see, shall I just cue you for the next slide? That would be great, next slide. There we go. So these are the initial topics I'm going to run through, and I know some of you are probably very familiar with all 4 of these things, but it's sort of important to nest them as we go along before we start talking about how the housing and health collaboration per se. So bear with me, I won't take very long on each of these, but just enough to give a little bit of context. So let's start with Medicaid, next slide. So again, I'm sure that you're all very aware, but Medicaid is basically an insurance program, a federal insurance program that's administered by each state. And each state has the opportunity to sort of mold their Medicaid program in certain ways that they want it to look within the confines of federal rules. So Oregon's version of Medicaid is Oregon Health Plan, which was created in the 1980s. And it's sort of a novel approach in that most states take however much money they have for their Medicaid programs and figure out how many people they can serve. And Oregon kind of did the reverse. Oregon, even back in the 1980s, said, you know, we want to figure out how to serve everybody, how everybody can have health insurance. And so let's figure out how much money we have and instead limit what the benefit looks like, but maximize the number of people who can get the benefit. So that was dubbed the Oregon Health Plan, remains rather unique in the country and is considered pretty cutting edge. Then just to build on that, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, somewhere in there, coordinated care organizations were sort of the next iteration of how to up the game around how Medicaid works in our state. So coordinated care organizations are locally or regionally situated organizations that administer the Medicaid benefit for that region. There are 16 coordinated care organizations in Oregon, mostly scattered around by region. Most regions only have one CCO. Our region happens to have 2 CCOs. But the idea there was that each CCO would be sort of unique in some ways to the needs of its particular region and would partner. So even back when CCOs were first created 11 years ago, the idea was that they would partner across the silo of traditional healthcare, that they would partner with early learning hubs and local public health authority and local mental health authority and other county functions, as well as community-based organizations and that sort of thing. So that's the idea behind having them be regional. So HealthShare is one of 2 such coordinated care organizations in the Tri-County area. And then just to remind you that we are coordinated care organizations by definition are Medicaid managing organizations. So that's the sum total of the populations that we focus on are people enrolled in Medicaid or the Oregon Health Plan. And currently in Oregon, there are about 1.4 million of Oregonians enrolled in the program, which is usually hangs between about 25 and 30% of our population. Next slide. So HealthShare is by far Oregon's largest Medicaid coordinated care organization. We have an enrollment of around 460,000 people of that 1.4 million. So if you're doing your math, you're coming up with HealthShare having over 30%, it's about 32% of enrolled Oregon Health Plan members in just this one CCO. And remember, there are 15 others where the rest of that 68% is scattered among. So HealthShare is, feels kind of the weight of the responsibility to really figure out how to execute on the dream of the coordinated care organization model because we have a lot of people relying on us. Our CCO, HealthShare CCO, as well as other CCOs, have work that is guided by a community health improvement plan. So every region has a community health improvement plan that drives some of the goals and strategies of each CCO. And in addition to that, HealthShare also has a strategic plan, which is designed and kind of overseen by our Community Advisory Council and our Board of Directors. And both of those plans, the Community Health Improvement Plan and the Strategic Plan, at this moment in time, have identified access to housing as a priority. And and health equity as a foundational sort of centering principle in the work that we're doing. So next slide. And Mindy, if I forget something, please just jump in. I can't see you, but just please feel free to interrupt me. So I want to talk just for 1.5 minutes about HealthShare itself. HealthShare is a little, as you heard, it's quite a large coordinated care organization located here in the Tri-County area, but it's also a little bit unusually structured for a CCO. So HealthShare holds the contract, our contract for administering Medicaid benefits in the Tri-County area with the Oregon Health Authority. But then we subdelegate the risk, the insurance risk, if you will, to 5 subdelegates. And these names are going to be very familiar to you. So it's OHSU, Oregon Health Sciences University Health, Legacy Health in partnership with Pacific Source, Kaiser, Providence, and Care Oregon. So each of those 5 subdelegates are essentially one option of an insurance plan that HealthShare members can choose from among. We're really proud of the fact that our members can choose among those 5 plans. And each of those 5 plans can distinguish themselves in various ways in how they administer the benefit. But at the end of the day, they all have to kind of align under HealthShare's both the strategic plan, but also HealthShare's values, including that driving value of centering equity. In addition to those 5 subdelegates, the 3 counties each have a permanent position on HealthShare's board of directors. The counties were extremely important when HealthShare was created back in 2011, 2012. And they continue to have an extremely powerful and important voice in both the development of our strategic plans, but also how we carry out our mission of improving access to care, improving outcomes, and improving the person's experience in the healthcare system. So next slide. So now I'm going to go back to Medicaid a little bit and remind you that each state gets to carry out Medicaid in the way that it wants to within the confines of federal rules. But even those federal rules can be messed with a little bit. Federal rules set standards both for eligibility and also what Medicaid benefits can pay for. And each state can negotiate with the feds on those things, on those 2 areas. So Oregon started negotiating with the feds about what our Medicaid programs can look like way back in the 1980s, and we continue to renegotiate every 5 years or so. And the reason we do that is because it allows us an opportunity for more flexibility and freedom in how to use Medicaid funding in order to truly promote better health, better experience, and health equity in our population. So this latest waiver, which was approved starting in 2023, but will actually, most of the components will go into effect 2024 because we needed a year or so to sort of ramp up for what we got in the waiver. And, I do have to take a moment and a shout out to Oregon Health Authority for negotiating so hard on behalf of people who are enrolled in Medicaid in our state, because it's a rather bold vision that you're about to hear about. So next slide, and we'll go into the components of the current waiver. So the final waiver components really roll up underneath an overall goal to advance health equity. And that was kind of the driving force behind negotiations for this particular waiver, which will last us at least 5 years and potentially a little bit longer. So within that goal of advancing health equity, you can think about what we got in the waiver in about 4 sub-goals. One is to, and I'm going to touch on each of these super briefly, but then we're really going to drop into that second one that you see showing up in blue there. So one of the sub-goals is ensuring that people can maintain their health coverage. Medicaid is an insurance program that you have to constantly show your eligibility, and people tend to churn in and out of eligibility depending on getting a job or a change in their health status or a change in their basic income status. And it's really hard on families who sort of live on the edge. And so we got a little bit longer time in between when people have to prove eligibility. That was one part of that one. And then the other really important part of that first one is that children remain eligible to stay on Oregon Health Plan until they're 6 years old, regardless of changes in their status. So that ensures that our very most vulnerable people, our young children, can depend on their health insurance for those first critically important years of their life. The second area is improving health outcomes by addressing, this is really important, these are 4 words here, health-related social needs. And I'm going to say those 4 words a whole bunch in the next 10 minutes. So kind of burn those into your brain, health-related social needs. And again, I'm going to go back to those in a minute. So I'm going to cross over that one now and head over to ensuring smart, flexible spending for health-related social needs and health equity. So that really gives us freedom to use Medicaid funds in a little bit different way than maybe you all even are used to seeing healthcare federal funds used. So I'm going to be talking more about that. And then finally, creating a more equitable, culturally and linguistically responsive healthcare system. And frankly, although that's officially in the waiver, Oregon Health Authority and CCOs have been working on that in a pretty meaningful way for even the few years preceding this waiver. If you want more information on any of these areas, I think the Oregon Health Authority has a pretty good website about them. And of course, you have an expert sitting in your midst. Mindy knows this stuff inside and outside. But let's move on now and talk about health-related social needs. Next slide. Okay, so within that blue bucket, health-related social needs, there are 3 benefit categories. So each of these categories, housing, food, and climate, in these boxes that you're looking at, basically there are definitions in each of these boxes that spells out what the Medicaid money can be spent on as a benefit. So these are our kind of outside parameters. We can't spend it on stuff that isn't on this list in accordance with our agreement with the federal government on how we will spend Medicaid funds. I hope I said that right. But what we are probably going to do is not cover all of these things necessarily all at once on January 1st, 2024. OHA and CCOs are still trying to figure out how we can make sure we can do it well. So there's a little bit of ramp up time. But whatever we decide to do on January 1st, 2024, it can't exceed these categories and fall under the Medicaid benefit. There is a caveat, which I'll get to in a slide or two. So let's run through this just quickly. And those of you who are familiar with housing and supported housing, these will look really familiar to you in that first box. So rental assistance or temporary housing, up to 6 months. That's a really important parenthetical remark, because 6 months of this benefit is not, obviously a lifelong solution. And for some people, 6 months is just really a drop in the bucket. So that's immediately something that has our attention and has to be factored into whatever strategy comes forth on how to best use this new Medicaid benefit. The second one is utility assistance, which really goes hand in glove with that first one. Again, up to 6 months. The third, one-time transition and moving costs, just getting somebody sort of settled. Housing deposits and fees. Medically necessary home modifications. So that would be like wheelchair ramps and that, that sort of thing. Pre-tenancy and tenancy support services. And then this last one, navigation and/or case management for housing. And I do want to point out that that one is not tied to only 6 months. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility on how to use the benefit to help someone get into housing, unlike that very first one where it's kind of hard and fast, rental assistance, temporary housing up to 6 months. I'm going to mention the other two categories, food and climate, because we at HealthShare think that a lot of our members who are going to benefit from that housing category are probably going to be the same people who might need these other two benefits as well. So food, nutrition and cooking education, fruit and vegetable prescriptions. So that means their provider can actually prescribe fruits and vegetables up to 6 months. There's that darn 6-month thing again. Meals up to 3 a day or healthy food boxes for pregnant members, children, and youth with special health care needs. That's what that long acronym stands for, up to 6 months. And I do have to say, I wrote a little note to OHA way back when and said, do you know pregnancy lasts for more than 6 months? But they didn't answer me. I don't know if Mindy, you knew I did that. And then medically tailored meal delivery up to 3 times a day, up to 6 months for people who are needing kind of acutely special diets in the context of a health condition. And then finally, navigation and/or case management for getting to community-based food resources. And then that last category really has come to the fore in the last few years with wildfires, smoke, extreme cold, extreme heat, and trying to figure out how we can use a Medicaid benefit to ensure our members stay safe in the context of these climate events that are so detrimental, especially to people with particular health conditions. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So Medicaid benefit, that means, and by definition, people have to be eligible in the first place for Medicaid and then eligible for benefits within the Medicaid rubric. So who's potentially eligible? And I will say that, again, these 6 categories you're about to see are what was finally negotiated between OHA and the feds, but we won't necessarily see all of these happen right at the start of the benefit. Chances are that it will be a subset of these that the governor and the OHA will determine that we start with. So hearkening back to that last slide, don't go back to that last slide, but maybe you remember I kept calling out that it's only for 6 months, that housing part. So 6 months is really a better amount of time for people in transition. And so when you stare at these 6 categories, think about people who are transitioning from either one system to another or one care level to another. So people leaving psychiatric facilities, Oregon State Hospital, inpatient psych, residential psych, people leaving incarceration, jails, juvenile corrections, and prison, people who are especially vulnerable and experiencing extreme weather events. That's sort of vague, but you might think of vulnerability in terms of certain clinical conditions or certain age or certain disabilities. Youth in foster care who are aging out of the foster care system, so they'll no longer be supported by the Department of Human Services system, but would benefit from being housed long enough for them, for their housing to be supported long enough for them to get on their feet, get into education, employment, et cetera. Youth with special health care needs, especially those older youth. Youth with special health care needs are the age of description there is up to age 26 now. So you might think about these folks as people who are young adults who are trying to get on their feet, much as the aging out of foster care kids. And then some people who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk for homelessness. And again, that's pretty vague. So I think our government entities are going to be busy trying to get more specific about what that means. And likely it will be combined with one of those other categories. Next slide. Okay, I almost dread going through this with you because it sounds so geeky, but it is important. So for several years, we have had CCOs have had the opportunity to apply what's called health-related services. Unfortunately, HRS is very close to HRSN, but actually they're very different things. So I've been talking about health-related social needs, which is the HRSN, which is the Medicaid benefit, which will come in under the waiver. But health-related services is different in that it's actually not a benefit. It's almost the opposite of a benefit, where it's specifically not covered by Medicaid, but these are services or products or situations that if the person just had it, their health condition could be much better managed or stabilized or recovered from. And so right now, case managers in Medicaid have the opportunity to apply these kind of flexible funds. You can think of them that way, member by member. So it's a very individualized situation where they think, you know, if this member just had a membership to the Y in order to be able to continue the exercises their PT has them doing that is so effective for their low back pain, that would really help them manage and even allow them to go back to work. So in a situation like that, we can apply HRS or flexible funds and ensure that person has that kind of access. And that's also true for those other things I just listed, housing, food, and climate. We can get access for folks to those things in an individualized way, and they don't have to be in those eligibility categories. So again, it's kind of complicated, it's kind of geeky. There are way too many alphabet soup letters in this case that look alike, but these are different things that could result in the same service going to two different people, one who is eligible and one who is not. Next slide. Okay, so that's all of the context for our housing benefit pilot. I'm going to pause and take a breath and just say, Mindy, are you ready for me to launch into this part?
Yeah, and I wonder if we want to pause for questions too. Yeah, so could we, before we move to the next section, is there any questions or reflections?
Yes.
Commissioner?
Just one quick question about the provision that it's some people experiencing homelessness. I think you said something about that, but I didn't really understand. What does that mean, some people? Is that a criteria that's yet to be defined?
Yeah, and Mindy, feel free to jump in and help me out. But, you know, I think it's going to be an additional criteria to those other categories. So for instance, somebody transitioning out of incarceration and are at risk or are homeless. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Monta.
Yeah, I was just curious, Maggie, if you could talk a little bit about the 6 month of housing. Now, it looks clear that you're going to help with rent assistance, but when you think about housing, is this going to have the ability to work with organizations to buy housing capacity that are supportive rather than an individual trying to deal with their own housing themselves?
That's definitely the dream. Mindy, do you want to tackle that one?
I think we're, sorry, I'm still learning how these microphones work. I think we're clear that for this to be successful, we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. But the rules of the program as they've been set up and negotiated with the feds are not gonna make that a straightforward thing to do. So a benefit really is tied to an individual and what they need. There are creative ways that we can do contracting to provide those services, but it's going to take some creativity and partnership to figure out how to do things like that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll say this one more time. I know I said this at the Health Share Board retreat where I presented, but one of my concerns with the housing benefit is the supplantation of housing funds that are being funded by cities and counties, pushing organizations to get paid from the individual's benefit rather than buying capacity. That creates challenges because capacity purchasing of housing programs keeps us funded and being able to operate, where fee for service really makes housing a risky business for housing providers, I'll say.
Thank you, Mata.
There are provisions in what's been negotiated with the feds that we cannot reduce our spending in those areas in food and climate and housing from what we already do. So that is an obligation the state will have to report back to federal partners to ensure that that sort of shifting doesn't happen.
All right, let's go Mike and then Ebony.
Is there information on if 6 months is enough time to get people either transition through the experience through Health Share, and what happens to the individuals when we hit this magic 6 month mark? And is there a trend, like, do we get them into something else, or do they drop off, or what's the next step?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. I think we have to be super aware of not doing harm. And actually, that's going to lead us right into the next section where we talk a little bit about our experience in the housing pilot that we've been running for the last year or so. Because it's, if anything, it has both magnified and emphasized our need to be working hand in glove with our county and housing partners so we can figure out what the transition is to. And I think that's going to be the task of when we first start implementing this benefit, that we're thinking of that from day one. So it's a really important, maybe the important question that you're asking.
I think maybe the other thing just to add to that is we are one of 5 states to have this approved at all. CMS has never agreed to pay for any sort of housing out of a Medicaid benefit before. And so the weight of the responsibility of the state to figure out how to make good use of that, how to demonstrate where it has shortfalls, where it's not serving our communities, all of that, it's on us.
And I'm going to go out on my skis a little bit here about something I'm not entirely knowledgeable about, but if my historical accuracy is off, please somebody interrupt me and let me know. But as I understand it, the Medicaid waiver was originally a concept back in 2015 and 2016, and the application was pulled after the presidential election. Oregon did not submit the application at that point. Hawaii did, I think, and Hawaii was successful in securing the waiver at that time. Also at that time, you'll remember that there was little to no money in any of the systems for homeless services. And to have anything coming in on a regular basis to pay for rent would have been incredibly valuable. Fast forward a few years and the passage of the SHS measure, we now have significant amounts of money flowing in every year on an annual basis. And our job, and we'll talk a little bit more, and I think Dr. Bennington Davis will talk a little bit more about this, our collective job, that the task you've given us, is to figure out how to leverage both those resources so we are not doing harm to the folks who are being served with this funding.
Great, thanks.
I hope that was accurate.
I don't see anybody getting upset. No, I was saying I didn't see anybody critiquing his historical analysis. Ebony, please.
I see how it is, Ben.
I see you, I see you.
Yeah, so my question was, I know you all said you were trying to prioritize people in transition. Is there any collaboration currently going on with the state to make housing more accessible to those who were formerly incarcerated?
So the one of the populations that will eventually be eligible are people coming out of incarceration. And you know, I don't know that there's been any actual work done on that between the CCOs and the state at this point. But you know, when it's time to add that population, I think we're well prepared to do that. We already have you know, data on that, and I don't know. I'm floundering a little bit because I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Not necessarily. I guess kind of, because there's not being work done on that. I mean, currently it is extremely hard to get people that are formerly incarcerated into housing. So I am just wondering if that's a community we're prioritizing, then what is being done to actually make that plausible?
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, there's, so they are one of the, you know, 6 populations that have been described. They probably won't be the population we start with in 2024, to my knowledge.
Mindy, you want to add, and then we'll go to Jess?
Oh yeah, and in the pilot, folks coming out of incarceration is part of what HealthShare started with, so we'll talk a little bit about our early experience with that, but in the conversation with the state, it is later. They are starting with a more, a definition of a population that has a significant mental health. Sorry. Oh my God, yeah, Vicky can't hear you.
Just get it closer to you, probably.
Did I do it? Okay. Okay, thank you. Maggie, I'll talk about this in a second. We have a pilot going on that, you know, when we thought that maybe this is what would happen with the waiver, we started before we knew what definitions that OHA would agree to with this, the feds, et cetera. We started trying to pilot what would it look like. And so Maggie's going to share a little bit of that experience. Folks coming out of corrections were prioritized in that pilot. So we'll share a little bit of those learnings. And then as we get to implementation of the 1115 waiver across the state, the population that the OHA is thinking about starting with right now, though there's opportunity to influence that, is folks with a significant mental health issue, substance use disorder, and are homeless.
Great, thank you. Let's go Jess and then Vahid.
Yeah, I know there's more presentation to come, so I don't want to distract us from that, but I really appreciate everyone's question and invite those kinds of questions as we hear them up in the conversation, because I think it's important to ground ourselves. This isn't new.
Jess.
Either. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. It's an important question, Ebony, and it's important to remind ourselves these are new resources that will be available to create housing solutions in addition to the capacities and work underway through our regional work here. But the problems are still, the challenges of housing the folks we're aiming to house are still very present and important. I think feedback for our health system partners to understand the complexities of creating housing solutions for people coming out of the justice system or people with severe and persistent mental illnesses. We still have to find landlords who are willing to work with us, even if we're using Medicaid dollars and all of the other kinds of challenges many of you around this table are experts in solving. So this is exactly the conversation that's really pertinent right now, is to help provide that level of expertise and understanding to our health system providers so that we leverage the existing capacities and talents of our housing system to create system efficiencies with these dollars rather than duplicating a whole new system of care.
Thank you, Jess. Vahid? Or did you want, well, before, okay, I thought you were going in a different direction.
I'll be brief because Jess said mostly what I was going to say, but the question Ebony raised, I think, underscores the importance that something that Maggie underscored, right? That we really be closely coordinated, the housing system and the health systems in the implementation of this waiver. In that specific question, the housing systems are working on, landlord engagement and landlord incentives and landlord agreements, that we're enrolling landlords and asking them in return for these incentives, you are going to relax or eliminate some of your screening criteria, and we will be housing people into these units. And we're securing those agreements. So there are there are ways that the housing system can address that. It doesn't, it doesn't overcome the challenge globally, Ebony, obviously, but we are adding capacity in our housing system through these kinds of landlord engagements that do facilitate the quicker housing of folks with criminal backgrounds than without that. And without that partnership with the housing system, the health system, of course, if it were to, which we're not doing that, we're coordinating. If it were to try to do this independently, would not have that infrastructure, system, relationships, or history to address those kinds of needs. So it just underscores the need for both of the systems to integrate here.
All right, thank you, Vahid. So let's go Valeria and then Mercedes.
Oh, I was just gonna sort of mention the same line as what Vahid just said with barriers to access and screening criteria. And I think some of that work is gonna look at through our landlord recruitment and retention work that is currently underway. So we'll explore some themes coming from that later this fall.
Great, thank you. Mercedes?
Yes, thank you. And I think this also connects back to the work around coordinated entry, right? Like if the qualifications we have for coordinated entry say if you've been housed for 6 months, you aren't qualified, then we will be explicitly disqualifying people who are using this assistance. So that's why it's so important to make sure that that tool isn't something that's used to eliminate people's eligibility based on their utilization of other services, which right now we do see. And so it's another reason why it's important to keep this kind of thing in mind, this kind of continuity of service and support when we look at ways of improving the coordinated entry screening process.
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes. Any other comments? Okay, let's bring the slides back up and move to the next section.
So you can jump to the next slide, but I have to say between Vahid and Jess, you guys kind of cut to the chase, and everything you said is kind of what we've learned in our pilot. So if you want the cliff notes, you can just tune out after listening to them. But as Mindy said, when we were anticipating and really hoping that the Oregon Health Authority would negotiate with the feds around a housing benefit, we really do believe that being housed is part of being well, and we see all the time in the healthcare system, as I know you are aware, that we pour, buckets of money into someone's care and treatment when they're acutely ill, and then kind of fail to support them to stay that way or to even fully recover. So we at HealthShare are very excited about the idea of housing and health kind of pairing up. So when we were hoping for a waiver, anticipating a waiver, we crafted a pilot where we kind of said, well, if there were a benefit, what could it look like? And it started, the planning started in January 2022. And our eyes were bigger than our stomachs. And we had imagined we could get 1,500 people in over the 18 months that the pilot was going to run. But the first thing that happened is it took us 5 months to even ramp up. And that really goes to a lot of what Jess said, that, and Vahid too. I mean, just even getting together a network of housing providers and trying to explain what we were up to, having enough navigators, that kind of thing, that just all took longer than we had anticipated. And then I think housing and health, even though they are very much related to each other, they have pretty different cultures. And so we're having to navigate that as well. And I remember one professor who was doing an evaluation said to me, the worst thing that could happen is for the healthcare system to impose its inefficiencies and quirks onto the housing system. Don't let that happen. And we don't want that to happen, but it does mean that we have to somehow marry those cultures in a way that is efficient and effective, not just for the members receiving services, but we sure don't want to disrupt the housing system either. So it took us a while to get rolling, and since May of 2022, so a little bit over a year, we've had about 500 people enrolled. Go ahead, next slide. The benefit package, maybe not so coincidentally, looks a lot like the benefit package coming out of the OHA. You can see it here. You know, I will add editorializing a little bit. As we've heard from some of our subject matter experts, that adding employment services to this list would be really helpful. And OHA did try to negotiate that in with their federal discussions, but unsuccessfully. Next slide. So HealthShare, even from its inception, has been all about partnerships. CCOs, you know, were invented with the idea that they would work across silos and work more with counties and education, early learning programs, that kind of thing. So it's sort of in our nature to want to collaborate. And currently, we're really appreciative of the monthly meetings that we're having with the counties, with community partners, including housing providers and health system partners, as we learn about each other and figure out you know, how to get past some of the barriers that you all have brought up during your question and answer period, because we're certainly running into all of that. We're also very aware, especially with this being a 6-month benefit that's coming at us. Our original benefit under the pilot was 12 months. We thought that might be long enough. And so, you know, it's a bummer that it's 6 months. But even with 12 months, we're very aware that having access or figuring out how to be part of long-term rent assistance access, working with the counties is going to be a key factor in the success of how this benefit is administered. We are having, to one questioner's point about coordinated access, we are having conversations about that. And how do we, you know, how do we do that? How do we work that? I don't have an answer yet, but we feel like we have the right people at the table, and those conversations are surfaced and being discussed. And Liam, I'm really glad you're part of this discussion, because when I stop talking, I bet you can add a lot to what we've been doing in those meetings. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our so-called RSHIF steering committee. That stands for Regional Supported Housing Investment Fund. And actually, HealthShare established the RSHIF steering committee, I think about 4.5, maybe almost 5 years ago now, way back when we were working with the Metro 300 effort with Washington County. And RSHIF is made up of people with lived experience, and they really help keep us, kind of keep us real. They help us know when we're asking too much or not asking a lot in terms of all of the forms we make people fill out and that kind of thing. So that committee is privy to all of our dilemmas and all of our decisions. Next slide. So we know that, we've got this pilot going. It's meant to end at about the end of 2023, but we also know that we can't just like chop off the pilot and start the benefit, because the populations won't exactly match necessarily. So we need to somehow bridge to the new benefit. So Mindy, I just wanted to double check with you this bullet point in here that OHA has postponed implementation until July 2024. Is that really what we think is true still?
Mindy just walked out, but is getting called on. Perfect timing.
Okay, that's fine. Well,
Yes,
again,
Mindy, we're
July.
verifying the first bullet, sub-bullet, that it's postponed to July 2024. That was the question.
Probably
Yes,
doesn't matter.
best we know at 4:59 on the 9th, yes.
I rest my case while I double checked on that, because it does seem to move around a little bit. You know, potentially bad news, but whether it's bad or good, the real news is that administration of this benefit is going to have to look like administration of Medicaid benefits in a lot of ways. I mean, we'll try to push on that a little bit. I really think hard about, you know, that one person saying, you know, don't foist the healthcare systems inefficiencies onto the housing system. But these sorts of kind of federal requirements around defining eligibility is going to have to be documented. We're going to have to define together what clinical and social risk is and how that's documented, how it's assessed, who assesses it, all of that stuff. And then tracking individual level encounter data and ensuring that the person stays eligible even throughout the 6 months and so forth. In Medicaid, there's something known as so-called closed loop referral process, which means that when somebody is eligible for a benefit, needs it, is referred for it, we have to then kind of demonstrate that we've come full circle and ensured that person gets what they're entitled to. So I saw, Ebony, a brief question, but then it disappeared from my screen.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Dang. Ben, do you see me now? I'm sorry. You said the populations won't quite match up when you transition to the waiver. And so I was wondering if there was any information on the population breakdown for those served in the pilot.
Yeah, it's really much the same as you see in the Medicaid waiver. The problem is that in the pilot, we've sort of gone all over those populations, whereas when the benefit kicks in, not all of the populations will be eligible at the get-go. Eventually they will be, but at the beginning they won't be. And so we'll have, and we still don't know which the eligible populations are going to be, but let me just use foster kids aging out of foster care as an example. So we're still pretty active in our pilot in assisting those youth. And say someone like that is in the housing pilot at the moment the benefit kicks in, but the benefit doesn't cover kids aging out of foster care because that's not their first population. So there'll be a gap in there. And we have to figure out kind of what to do with that, because, you know, we've been working with DHS, with the foster care system in helping them develop pathways to get these kids into the housing pilot. And then if suddenly in January or July or whatever, we can't do that anymore because it's not a covered benefit, we have to figure out what to do to bridge over that, if that makes sense. Eventually they'll be eligible, but at the beginning of the pilot, it'll be pared down to one or two of the populations. And then the last bullet on this slide, still a lot of discussions going on about just how to administer this benefit, not just at the health share level, the CCO and county level, but really at the state level, including you know, the Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Housing Community Services, and others who really have a stake in all of this, including housing providers. So we still don't exactly know how administering the benefit is going to look, who will administer it per se. So next slide, a lot of questions. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, as I said, we're finding value really every day in bringing all parties to the table, certainly including the counties, but also including providers. So recently we were meeting with Sequoia, which is a program out in Washington County that houses people with serious mental illness, and discovered that part of their program, a huge and important part of their program, is the use of peers to help support people and help keep them housed. And we all know how important that is and how important peers are and how effective they are. But come to find out that Sequoia was paying for peers out of their sort of capped funding for housing, not realizing that actually peer support is something that can be billed for under Medicaid. So that was an example of how us meeting with Sequoia helped them figure out another funding source for a service that they offer. Certainly on my own personal experience, personal and professional experience with COVID, on the medical side, we were looking at, especially when COVID first started, if you can flash back to those early days of COVID, when people were testing positive, maybe not necessarily sick, we really needed to get them out of often congregate living or multifamily living or even living with other family members. And so where do they go? They're not sick, so they don't need, like medical housing, but they need to figure out how to stay safe during those, 2 long weeks of waiting for the incubation period and that kind of thing. So at that time, we started meeting with housing providers in a whole new way, started thinking about how to use housing vouchers in a whole new way. And that really called up to us the power of the partnership and just the tremendous importance of housing providers in our kind of healthcare brains, thinking about that. And then, of course, the pilot is the housing and health pilot that we're doing is a great example of how we're trying to cross out of silos. And then finally, and I'm sure you all are very aware of this, certainly organizations like Central City Concern and Cascadia, LifeWorks, VOA, know that when you're housing people with behavioral health needs, it's essential to pair up behavioral health supports with housing supports and housing. And we suspect that within this pilot or within the waiver, and certainly our experience in the pilot, is a huge need, is to figure out how to have behavioral health access and behavioral health support, both substance use and psychiatric mental health support for people who have struggled with being housed, getting housed, and staying housed, and often have had maybe a tremendous shock in their lives recently, which is why perhaps they've become unhoused. So all of those, that's sort of a package deal and is precipitating us to work across those historical silos. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. So what are we doing now? And again, there are people in the room there with you who can speak to this and would welcome Liam's and others, Jess, your input. But we're convening both healthcare and housing leaders, as well as our county partners and Metro, developing a shared vision for how to go about executing on this Medicaid waiver, even though there are still a lot of unknowns. As information trickles in, we're taking it straight to that table where our partners can assist in the creation of what this is going to look like. Really pointing out a lot of the things that during the question and answer period you all brought up. Those are the things that are both scaring us and also have challenged us to try to deal with before this becomes a reality. And how can we make this a good thing? I mean, in theory, this should be a good thing, and certainly do not want to do harm. And then, the end result, no matter what the end result is, hopefully there will be better integration between our systems and among our systems. Next slide.
So I think this next slide, before we get to the next slide, I think Liam is up to talk just a little bit here, and then Allie is the next slide after this one.
Fantastic. I'll go on mute. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks for keeping us in check, Abby. Much appreciated. I just wanted to jump off what Dr. Bennington Davis was saying at the end there, which is the outcome, which is a much more integrated system to provide integrated services for the people that we serve. The folks who I've been in the meetings with are sick of hearing me say this, but for folks who have worked in housing for the longest time, we've looked over the fence into healthcare. If only we could get that for the people we serve. Well, we're hearing the same thing from the folks in healthcare. If only we could get some housing for the folks that we're serving. Well, finally, we're at a stage where we have the resources, we have growing staff capacity anyway to start figuring out what that looks like. And I think we've gained a lot of momentum just in the last 6 months when the TCPB set this recommendation for us, or set this goal and the recommendation. And so the work that we've been doing so far has been tremendous. People are showing up every 2 weeks for a 2-hour meeting. The meeting is growing with different partners, and there's a lot of enthusiasm in the room. I think having the CEO from HealthShare at those meetings and having the CEO from HealthShare on this body demonstrates that there is a very serious effort underway here. And we're also under the timer as well. I mean, it's moved from January to July, but that's no time at all to get these systems integrated. So I kind of want to prize apart just two things, and that is the rollout of the Medicaid waiver and how we want it to work for the folks that we serve, but also how we want to make it work for service providers, understanding that there are very different things in the way that billing happens. And so that is front of mind for us too. And then there is a larger conversation around how do we integrate these systems? What does coordinated entry look like in systems integration? And that speaks to another goal that the TCPB set. So we're seeing some opportunity here to leverage both these goals when we're heading towards that greater alignment. And that, I don't think it's just the talking shop. I think we're actually moving to a place where we had a great meeting with you last week and Dr. Bennington Davis, and I think we're gonna get going on that very soon. I'm gonna shut up now because I think we're getting a bit over time here, but I'm personally very excited about this. I also understand that the recommendation from the TCPB 6 months ago was to come with an update and some recommendations. We don't have a proposal, I'll be honest with you. We have set up 4 work group meetings that are gonna meet over the course of August to focus on 4 key areas to develop a framework for the Medicaid waiver rollout. We can come back to you once that has been finalized, probably in the next 3 months. Does that sound right, Mindy? Okay.
And did I make the mic work?
It sounds like you did.
Okay, and I might just add, underscore something that you talked about, which is the opportunity is there beyond just the waiver. So we heard about, there's like lots of opportunity for planning for the specifics of the waiver, but the work around how we support peers from the health system, how we do integration work better, because we're taking care of the same population. And that's the field that the table is playing in. It's not just about this sort of specific initiative, it's how do we do better across both systems and take advantage of the resources of both. So just underscoring what you said.
Who's up? You're up? You got a couple slides that we want to pull back up? Is it slide 24?
Can you hear me online? Okay, I think I'm live now. Yeah, great segue, Liam. I'm Allie Alexander Sheridan. I'm with Washington County, and I'm just teeing up a little bit of our operational work that's underway as part of this to provide a bit more detail. So we're at a place where we're developing operational recommendations to bring forward to the state. And the goal of this is to really envision how we might operationalize the waiver benefits, particularly within our regional context, while keeping in mind that how the state implements the waiver in rural areas might look a little bit different because we're unique here with our supportive housing services measure and all the building we've been doing in the past 2 years. So we're bringing together the 4 work groups that Liam referenced, and they're comprised of county housing staff, CCOs, community partners, health plans, and also behavioral health experts. And on the next slide, I'll just provide a bit of an overview about what those 4 work groups are. So the first one is population definition. I think Mindy might have referenced that we anticipate that the state will identify the first population as folks with SPMI, severe and persistent mental illness, or SPMI plus, which includes those folks who also have substance use disorders, and also those folks that are experiencing homelessness. So we want to co-develop how we define that. There's not a built-out diagnosis of what SPMI is. and also think about how we also include folks that aren't formally engaged in behavioral health services and may not be engaged in behavioral health services. The next work group is assessment and referrals. So we imagine that inflow to the benefit will come both from the housing system and the health system. So we'll want to gauge how folks are being screened, also align that with coordinated entry, like others have said, and then also think about the referral mechanisms and workflow of how folks get connected to the benefit. The third is data sharing and infrastructure. So this group will work to identify the key elements both at the system level and at the individual level that are really important for being able to share across our systems, and then also identify some of the procedures, the workflows, and the systems that are needed to share that data across the health and housing systems. And then the last is network management, and so how we define the network of entities that will be really administering these benefits. So this may be health systems, but also thinking about our community-based partners that are out there doing the work of delivering homeless services, and also how we define service delivery, standards of care, quality of care as well. So that's what we're tasked with these 4 work groups. Some of them are already launching, and our goal is to get this work launched in August, and again, kind of develop that operational plan of recommendations to bring to the state. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Ally. So I think, Mindy, is that your last slide, the next one? You kind of hit on a couple of these points, yes. So, anything else to add?
No.
Okay, well, Liam, why don't you close us out? I mean, if folks have burning questions, we'll maybe hold 1 or 2 for those. But we are right at time, so Liam.
Yeah, just before potential Q&A and before Ebony returns, I just wanted to cap it off by saying that to center our thoughts here, a lot of this work is towards OHA. And I wanted to highlight something that Dr. Bennington Davis was kind of referring to earlier, and Mindy was referring to. OHA and the state gets to determine the rollout generally across the state in collaboration with CCOs. We think we're different regionally. We think we're different, obviously, because every region thinks they're special, but no other region has, a $250 million a year, at least, revenue for homeless services. And so we want to present to the state that we are unique. And so through these work groups, that's the plan to get the ball rolling, to make sure that the state, as one, as unified as it can be, is listening to us as a coalition of folks who run these systems. That also means that the next key step is working with providers. And you probably were looking at this and thinking, well, where are the providers in all of this? Well, we got to get these systematic components in place first to make sure that we are working in tandem with the state, then in order to work with providers to co-design the rollout. So I just wanted to make sure that was covered.
Great, thanks, Liam. Any burning questions? Because we're a couple minutes over. Mercedes.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if there had been any consideration for the behavioral health resource networks, the Measure 110 funded providers, because I heard a couple of times, that we want to do maybe work with folks who are not already engaged in the healthcare system, and at least where substance use is concerned, without a diagnosis, who aren't getting served by the healthcare system, but those networks are funded to serve people regardless of diagnosis. So I was just wondering if HealthShare had considered that network and that body of work in how they're thinking about providing support.
Mindy, is that a you question? I think.
I'll just say, I think it's an important point. Mercedes, I don't think we've maximized that.
If Mindy's talking, I can't hear.
Just keep it on and push it. Go like this.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks,
there
Ben.
you go.
Maggie, if you're still on, I'm curious for your perspective. Mercedes, I think it's a good point. I don't think it's something we've maximized. I do know that the state has a little openness to broader definition of diagnosis that includes, or that has space for folks who don't have an active, like a diagnosis on a chart. So all opportunity there. Maggie, anything to add?
Nope, that kind of, I think the state is thinking about it as diagnosed or undiagnosed, but somehow kind of in the way of being successful in their health and housing goals or something like that. But yeah, they're trying to keep it broad.
Yeah. Yep.
And thank you, Ben, and thank you, Mercedes, for the questions. I think this is another example of the importance and complications of systems alignment that we're trying to achieve. If the rollout of the population begins with severe and the SPMI or SPMI plus population has been indicated, and possibly specifically with those who are also chronically homeless, we can anticipate that we're going to be working with people who actually are struggling to get served by Medicaid or connected to Medicaid or properly diagnosed to get the services they need through Medicaid. So it's almost as if the benefit, if that's the population we start with, it necessitates the system integration that we've long been working towards, and why part of the initial work before us is just as simple as clearly defining the population we're aiming to serve. So I really appreciate that point, Mercedes, and it highlights probably the mountain of work that's in front of us. And we'll need to be iterative and continuously improving, because we're not going to get this right by July of 2024. I think we all know that. But we need to all be in the work and at the table to continually be addressing these system questions.
Great, thanks, Josh. So maybe that's a good way to shift the mountain of work ahead of us. But we did preface this as a foundational conversation. So thank you all for that conversation. So Abby, let me pass it to you and we'll move into the data systems.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about regional homeless services in the realm of data. So why are we talking about data today? Because y'all wanted me to talk about data. So the presentation is a response to questions from Commissioner Jayapal, from Matt and other members on the TCPB about data in the region. And my goal is to orient you all to the work on that data coordination, practices, and alignment. And all of that includes shared definitions, methodologies, and reporting. So hope to give you a grounding in an understanding of the current state of data in our region. And then the reason why we're talking about this, beyond because you asked me to, is because this is good foundational information to know as we move into future possible decisions that the TCPB might need to make. And there will even be a presentation next month about teeing up one of those potential opportunities. So wait on, I'll keep you on, I don't know, keep you waiting for that one. And so as we keep talking about in this group, we have an unprecedented opportunity here with SHS and the ability to really step up our coordination, and we'll talk about some of those efforts. So next slide. Today we're gonna talk about how to understand how the data is coordinated and aligned across the region. I'm gonna walk you through the evolution of data collection and reporting in the region. We'll talk about data landscape prior to SHS funding first. So that includes how HUD shapes the data system, what is Built for Zero, and how that initiative shapes the data systems. Then we'll talk about the process Metro and counties went through to develop the data framework for SHS reporting. And then finally, the counties will present on their work on ongoing regional coordination efforts that are in service to SHS reporting, but also align data across the region to better understand the homeless population and also to use data more effectively moving towards ending homelessness. Next slide. So let's get into it. First, we need to know the difference between data and technology. So I think you all know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Data is the actual answers program participants give to questions asked by direct service staff. So that's the data. It comes from the people themselves. Technology includes the systems that we use to enter, track, report, and analyze data. And that includes databases, apps, analytics tools, etc. Next slide. So funders have nearly all the say about data, including methodologies, definitions, and reporting, because they're the ones providing the funding to do the work, and the data is the proof that the work was done. Historically, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, has been the primary funder of homeless services with approximately $37 million regionally in 2021. And then OHCS, or Oregon Housing and Community Services, is also a major funder of homelessness. And in 2021, they added approximately $18 million regionally. OHCS distributes their funds through the community action agencies. In Multnomah and Clackamas County, those community action agencies are embedded in the county structure, but in Washington County, Community Action is a standalone nonprofit that coordinates closely with Washington County. So OHCS funding primarily also comes from HUD. It's a pass-through from HUD to the state and down, and so that's something to keep in mind as we talk more about how these funders shape the data system. Additionally, there is local and private funds, so counties and cities fund homeless services. Foundational support exists in the communities. Those are pretty variable amounts across the county, so I didn't include them in these slides, but they do exist, and they do sometimes add data requirements, but they also have to enter data into the same system and follow some HUD rules, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Next slide. So how do funders actually shape the data system? They do it in a couple of different ways, and I'm going to talk mostly about HUD because that is the main funder that shaped our data system. So they do it through federal regulations. Through those federal regulations, they lay out the responsibilities of funded leadership structures and service providers, including collection, definitions, reporting, and methodologies. So in order to change some of the federal regulations, that takes an act of Congress, which is rare. There's also grant parameters, so keep this slide for now, but there's also grant parameters. So HUD releases a notice of funding opportunity every year, and with it comes requirements for policies, coordination, eligibility, reporting, and that can change annually and often does, and those are changed by the HUD SNAPS office, which is the office in charge of continuum of care funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. Finally, there's contract language. So HUD contracts directly with providers. It's not that HUD gives counties money to then give to providers through continuum of care. The majority of the HUD funding I just spoke about here, it goes directly from HUD to the providers. So those contracts between HUD and the providers, they reference and codify the federal regulations and the notice of funding opportunity language into those programs as they fund them. So talking about federal regulations. So the federal regulations require an HMIS. Many of you have heard this term. Many of you are intimately familiar with HMIS. It stands for Homeless Management Information Systems. So what HMIS actually is a broad term that HUD created to describe a type of database system that's capable of collecting and reporting the data on all homeless services. And it includes all of the HUD required data elements. So again, this is a term created by HUD in order to track data and report out for the funding that they're providing to communities. There are many software solutions or different technology options to meet the requirement of an HMIS. And I'll talk a little more about the way our region has gone in a little bit. The other thing you need to know is how we choose an HMIS. How do we decide which system or technology to use? And the HUD federal regulations say that continuums of care designate the HMIS. So what is a continuum of care? So next slide. Hold on a second. Where am I here? Okay. So what is a continuum of care? Continuum of care is a designated geographic region which is established through agreement between local homeless services leaders and HUD for the purposes of funding and coordinating a homeless services system. That's a lot. It's just a place that HUD said, this is your COC. COCs can be a whole state, they can be cities, they can be counties. In our region, it's very simple. Each county is its own COC or continuum of care. And so those COC staff are responsible to designate what their local HMIS will be, what technology they'll use to achieve the objectives of HUD to track the data and report it out. So since 2006, the region has used a shared implementation of a software called Service Point, which is a WellSky product. For the last 13 years, that implementation was statewide, which meant the whole state was on one system. But that has changed recently, and we'll talk more about that later. They have an embedded reporting tool in the system called Business Objects. So now we'll talk about grant parameters and contract language. So that was the HUD designation of an HMIS and how we landed on Service Point. So now let's talk about grant parameters and contract language and how they shape the funding system. So HUD grant parameters and contract language, they dictate the HMIS data standards and nationwide reporting standards that apply to the entire services system. So going to the next slide. So because the vast majority of OHCS funding comes from HUD, and you have HUD funding, next, you're looking at approximately $55 million in the community, all following that HUD-specific rules and regulations that come from the federal regs, contracts, and granting. Next slide. So in those regulations that HUD puts out, they say that every single funding source that contributes to homeless services provision, regardless of the funding source, that data needs to go into HMIS. So all homeless services programs, no matter what their funding source, federal, state, regional, local, private, HUD requires every single bit of that data to go into the HMIS. And so that is the way that we are able to look at our entire system through one software rather than looking at various databases to pull the information. So again, all the data that SHS receives from counties about homeless services, the vast majority of that data is grounded in HMIS, gathered from HMIS, which is grounded in those HMIS data standards that HUD sets. So other local funders can sometimes add questions or add more information to the data collection requirements, but they still have to collect the HUD required data elements. Now, not all COCs are doing 100% perfect data entry in their system. There are some little missing bits here and there, but our region is actually really strong in our coverage in HMIS. Next slide. So I've mentioned a few times HMIS data standards and reporting. So they have, HUD has, in their federal regulations, they have standards for what data needs to be collected. They're really strict about these standards. So first, they have the data standards manual. Those are specifications that are provided to each HMIS vendor. So each HMIS software system, any software system that wants to provide their system to meet the needs of HMIS, they have to adapt their software to meet HUD's methodology requirements. And then there's the HMIS data dictionary, which lays out the definitions of each of the data points and who has to collect them. So both documents list required data elements for all the different program types like emergency shelter, street outreach, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing across the board. And every year, every other year on the even years, HUD releases updates to their HMIS data standards manual and their data dictionary. And then when that happens, each continuum of care has to change their data collection, entry, and reporting practices to match those HUD standards each year. Then that requires a process of training providers and those entering the data, and then doing updates, HMIS administrative updates. Next slide. So HUD not only has standards for what data they require to be collected, but they also have standards for what data they want to be reported. So while these are HUD required standards, they are also, HUD required reporting standards. They are also meant to pull from your whole system. So HUD is not asking for HUD-funded reporting. They're asking for reporting on all of the homeless services, regardless of funding source, pulled from your HMIS. So here are the main reports that HUD requires. The first is the housing inventory count. It's essentially a count of all available housing resources in the community, beds available. The next is system performance measures. These are annual outcomes and measures that each COCs has to report on. And again, that's for their entire system, not just the HUD-funded. LSA, or longitudinal system analysis, that's the demographic data on the people who were in the beds that were previously reported for the housing inventory count. So yes, you have the beds, but how full were they, and how many people, and what were the demographics of the people in those beds? And finally, we have the point in time count, which many people are familiar with. This is a HUD required count. We do it because HUD tells us to, and it's an annual count of all people experiencing homelessness done in the last week of January. And there'll be more about the point in time count a little bit later. And so HUD uses all this data to track national progress towards addressing homelessness, to make future funding allocation decisions, and also to adapt programs and approaches to be more effective. All right, next slide. Everyone with me still? It's a lot of data stuff. Okay, Built for Zero. So why are we talking about Built for Zero? Built for Zero is a national movement to support housing and services systems and moving communities to a functional zero homelessness. So we're talking about Built for Zero because while Built for Zero doesn't provide funding directly to each county, it does drive data collection systems because all 3 counties are participating as designated Built for Zero communities. And so there's natural alignment happening as the counties work together to implement Built for Zero. And there'll be more on that when we talk about the coordination a little bit later. But the Built for Zero initiative is intricately connected to the coordinated entry system. So now I have to define coordinated entry for you as well. You see how data is connected to everything? It's everything. Okay. So now we have coordinated entry. So coordinated entry is at its base level, it's a system designed to move people from experiencing homelessness into permanent housing. So coordinated entry systems were developed within each county. They were also a response to a HUD requirement. So you can see how much these funders shape our system. And the HUD requirement was embedded into grant parameters and contract language. So that's the way HUD moved to require coordinated entry. When HUD initially started to require coordinated entry, they provide little guidance, pretty much no requirements, and no funding for these systems. Jess, did you want to add something? You debating?
Thank you. I was going to wait, Abby, but I really appreciate it. I'm a latecomer to coordinated entry. I left the field before it was required, and it's taken me a long time to learn it and understand it. And one thing that helps me understand why we use coordinated entry is, as a system, it's our mechanism for managing limited resources that can't meet the extent of our community need. And so we create this system so that we are equally prioritizing the different kinds of needs in our community with the different kinds of resources, the housing solutions we have in our community. So there's a level of fairness in how we can meet the limited need, we can meet some portion of the community need. So yes, it is designed to get people to housing, but it's specifically designed to help us manage the reality that we're not, referencing our previous presentation, we're not an entitlement-based system of service. We don't, if the government says house the people, we can't say, great, we'll house everybody. We are only gonna have enough resource to house a limited number of people, and so this is how we manage that.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add to that is, to me, the core purpose of coordinated entry system is also to shift the administrative burden of accessing systems away from individuals who are experiencing homelessness and towards the homeless services system. So it's not on the individual to call around to 5 different programs and figure out what's available. They get assessed once and they should have access to any available program. So yes, coordinated entry systems often were designed in a world of scarcity because they were developed as a requirement from HUD at a time based on whatever the system was at the time. So whatever Multnomah County had in place at the time, whatever Clackamas County had place at the time, whatever Washington County had place at the time of requirement, that's what was incorporated into the coordinated entry system. And that's what led sort of the design of the coordinated entry systems. And so as a result, all 3 counties, each county has a completely different coordinated entry system. There are certain overlaps and similarities, but we're working on 3 different counties with 3 different coordinated entry systems because they were developed independently of each other with very little guidance or funding from HUD. And so regardless of having different coordinated entry systems and different assessment tools, all 3 counties still use HMIS to collect data, pull reports, track progress, evaluate their coordinated entry systems as HUD gets more specific with the standards they want these systems to meet. So even the fiscal year 2024 changes to the HMIS standards include new coordinated entry questions. So now that you generally know what coordinated entry is, let's go back to Built for Zero. So Built for Zero is a framework of data and measurement tools that overlay the coordinated entry system. So the purpose of Built for Zero is to take these practices on achieving data quality and these best practices that they've used in various places around the country and apply them to our homeless services system so we can effectively measure the things we're trying to do to work towards ending homelessness. So many times people have the question of what is functional zero as far as Built for Zero. I'm going to give you a very brief definition, and that is that the homelessness in your community is rare, brief, and non-recurring. So rare meaning there are enough services to meet the need, sort of to Jess's point, that we've gotten to the point where we can meet that need. It's brief, so it's less than 30 days, and non-recurring, people experience it once. So Built for Zero framework is dependent on specific and clear data collection and reporting. So each community has to create policies for data collection among outreach programs. Let's look at the next slide. This will give you a little bit of an illustration of how Built for Zero works. So this is essentially an illustration of what would be included in a by name list. And it also shows inflow and outflow, which is a key measure that Built for Zero requires each community to report. So they're looking at those coming in to active homelessness or in need of homeless services, and then those who are currently on that by name list of active, by name list meaning people are on a list by their names, so we know who they are and we can move towards helping them move towards housing. And then the outflow is folks who are moving off of the list into either housing or other situations where they no longer need services. So This is an example of some of the information that Built for Zero requires, and HMIS is used to create this list. So all of the data that we get to create the by name list comes from our HMIS primarily. All right, next slide. So, oh, did you have a question, Mindy?
Maybe just a comment to underscore what Mercedes talked about earlier. I know there's lots of work going on in this area, but the conversation about the health system, I'm very aware that we end up serving the same folks, and there's no, somebody has to stay in a residential treatment facility, somebody has to stay in inpatient psych facility. There's no, just as much, there's no interaction between that population and this population, even though they're the same humans. So I think there's lots of opportunity there that we shouldn't forget about.
Yes, there's lots of exciting opportunity to look at the data we have in HMIS and find ways to connect it with healthcare systems. And we're not going to talk about one of those exciting opportunities today because we're not quite there yet, but it's part of the data subgroup that Ally talked about as part of the housing system. So we are working on it. Thanks for adding that, Mindy. All right, so now working into regional funding. So remember how much money we were getting as a region with HUD and OHCS? And now comes SHS funding. Bouncing right in here. Providing a level of funding that really dwarfs a lot of the existing amounts. And so regional partners have been working hard to get to the same level of shared methodology, definitions, and reporting standards as HUD and OHCS have spent years establishing. So what we do is we lean on current data systems. Everyone's already using HMIS with similar definitions and methodologies. And so we are leaning on HMIS and the data standards to start. It's smart because it helps us with coordination and alignment, but it's also required because, again, HUD doesn't care about your funding source. All of the data has to go into HMIS, and it has to meet the HUD HMIS data standards. Okay, so then the SHS measure passed, so what's next? How did we move through data? Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the SHS data and reporting came to be. I'm going to make it quick, though, because we're getting tired. So we got this great Gantt chart that tells us how this work came to be. So setting up the data framework, the framework includes measure required outcomes, like an expectation to move towards ending homelessness, expectation to end racial disparities in the homeless population. The framework includes identifying populations and eligibility criteria, specific outcomes, and reporting timelines and frequency. So the SHS measure work plan, work began on that right as the measure passed. In the summer of 2020, Metro convened a region-wide BIPOC-led data and outcomes visioning group. And that visioning group, the work of that visioning group became section 5.2 of the SHS work plan and the regional outcome metrics. So that group created the regional outcome metrics, and then that work was added into the work plan, which was approved by the council in December 2020. So then there's local implementation planning. So while Metro was working on the SHS plan, each county was working on their local implementation plan to create high-level overview of gaps, needs, and goals the counties hope to address with SHS measure funds. So as the counties were creating those plans, and the LIPs were approved by the Oversight Committee and then counties and then Metro Council, by April of 2021, those really included some high-level goals and helped to shape some of the SHS reporting down the road. Then we had intergovernmental agreements, IGAs, negotiated between Metro and the counties, and those negotiations led to further development of the framework and structure of what the SHS reporting would look like. Finally, county annual work plans based off the LIPs and all these goals also added some qualitative goals and data to the SHS reports. So SHS annual and quarterly report templates were created, and all the templates for these were co-developed between Metro and the counties. They were founded on that group in the summer of 2020 that created the outcome measures for the work plan, and then based in IGA and also operational oversight requirements that Metro had to consider. Next slide. So once that framework was established, it was really up to the counties to work together. The counties really took initiative to work together on what that reporting would look like. The counties are doing that and several other things to coordinate work among them. And so next slide, what I'm going to do next is kick it to each county to talk for just a couple minutes on a regional coordination initiative or two. First, Heather's going to talk about how the 3 counties work together to align on SHS reporting. Then Lori will talk about Lori will talk about regional HMIS implementation and the point in time count. And then Melanie will tell us about Built for Zero collaboration. So go ahead, Heather.
And as you go, when she said, Abby said a couple minutes, it was literal, like 2 minutes each. So we will share slides and we can follow up, but please keep it to about 2 minutes each. Challenge, Heather, go.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Scriver, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm here for Washington County, representing their data team. So I'm going to talk about the regional tri-county data team. As Abby showed on her previous slide, this group was formed back in November 2020, and this was formed back when the Metro SHS work plan was still being developed, because the counties recognized kind of the need to coordinate on the data and the metrics that would be required for reporting. There was a lot of meeting and heavy coordination happening between November 2020 and April 2022, where we were meeting mostly weekly to discuss these metrics. And the purpose was to reach alignment, essentially make sure that all of us were measuring and reporting on these things in the same way. And it was all based off of the language in section 5.2 of the SHS work plan. One thing I wanted to note is that this was happening at the same time that Metro was developing the reporting templates. And so if you look at our reports, you might see that they were presented in slightly different formats, but on the back end, the underlying calculations and methodology was the same due to this coordination. During the initial collaboration period, that was when we developed agreed upon regional metrics and specifications for all of the metrics that are listed below. So the vast majority of the measures that are included in our reporting, we were able to get to regional alignment on how we were calculating these. I'm not going to go into the bullets to save time, so can we move to the next slide? And then kind of after that initial heavy collaboration period, the meeting slowed down in April of 2022. We still met periodically, but it was less consistent. And this was in large part due to the fact that we had, already reached that regional consistency across those metrics that we included above. And then we had competing priorities where a lot of the data team had to switch their focus over to things like the regional PIT or the regional HMIS implementation that we'll be hearing about next. But we have began, meeting more consistently again in this year. Now that we are nearing our second annual report, there's a few more metrics that we still haven't finalized, and that is the retention measure and the inflow-outflow measure. We are very, very close to finalizing those, and we'll have them included in this year's annual report. And so we began meeting really in earnest back in March of this year, and we're meeting on a regular basis monthly. And we'll continue to meet even once we finalize retention and inflow-outflow. There's so much for us to talk about as a region in terms of just general data collaboration. And I will pass it back to Abby.
Fantastic work. Who's going next?
On to Lori.
Yeah, Lori, jump in.
Hey there, I'm Lori Kelly. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the planning and evaluation manager at the Joint Office, Multnomah County. I'll move quickly because I realize that we have very little time. So I just wanted to mention in talking about both of these things, the HMIS implementation and point in time count, we often talk about intent to align, but one of the reasons these are exciting to present on is they actually talk about what it's like to collaborate, not just shared vision, but to work together around details that allow aligned communication and operations as well. So that's some of the really cool parts of this work. So I know that we recently presented on the HMIS implementation, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're at. So just to orient everyone, up until 2019, Portland Housing Bureau and City of Portland were administrators of the HMIS function, but at that point, after much conversation around statewide implementation, we ended up with 3 different implementations or administrations. Lane County has their own. The rest of the state launched in 2021, and then the metro region decided to launch its own administration, which is right now moving into Multnomah County. We have a launch date planned for fall 2023. Right now, a lot of the background mechanisms of testing this out are almost there, but I just want to let you guys know that as an update. This coordination is significant because it really shows that 3 counties can work together towards shared goals, which have been kind of culminated in the coordination around IGAs, discussing things including privacy and security notices, regional governance structure, and also how we're going to manage change in the future. So things like the Technical Change Control Board and the Regional HMIS Council ensure that we have an ongoing facilitative process where we really have everybody weigh in and align on regional goals. This work will allow us to really combine data, ensure that we have the same definitions, and talk about measuring things on a tri-county level. Next slide. So the point in time count. The point in time count is a snapshot or a count of people experiencing homelessness on one particular night in January. HUD requires the Continuum of Care, so you just learned about, conduct an annual count of people experiencing homelessness who are sheltered in emergency shelter, transitional housing, and safe havens on a single night, and a street count is required every other year. Odd year. So this particular year, we wouldn't have to do it. So, or next particular year. So normally, historically, each county has funded and completed PIC count separately. This means different methodologies and different analysis. This also means there's potential for things like duplication across the counties, and also not really comparing apples to apples when we look at each of our scenarios. Counting together means we can understand the scope of the issue as a region and duplicate across county lines, and also ensures we're really unified in our process and are focused on key questions. So for this year's count, the 3 counties worked in unison to launch their counts. We started working in 2022 around everything from selecting our consultants. We went with Portland State University's Homeless Research Action Collaborative, as well as the Regional Research Institute. And we also hired a project manager. And we did all this to make sure that we were collaboratively working towards everything from shared methodology, but to also foster maximum collaboration around all of the work. So for the week of the count, we used a centralized command structure. The count took place over the week of January 25th to 31st, asking survey participants where they slept on the night of January 24th. We also drew from shelter and transitional housing data. And then on top of that, we added data from our current systems to get the most accurate understanding. We've already submitted all of our data to HUD that we need to, but we're currently also engaging in a collaborative analysis that will produce a long report that really dives into everything from equity statistics to what are the situations around people housing, what is their history, and so forth. And so this has been really exciting because it means that we can now articulate on a county, not just a county level, but on a regional level, the scope of homelessness in the area. And it's our intention to continue to collaborate in an ongoing fashion and really refine this methodology with our consultants.
Terrific. Is that Melanie? Jump in,
Hi,
Melanie.
Jumping in. Hi, everybody. Melanie Pasquale, she, her pronouns. I'm the data and quality manager for Clackamas County. So all 3 counties are now designated Built for Zero communities. What this means is we have joined in with over 100 different communities, cities and counties that have committed to measurably ending homelessness across entire populations. The 3 counties in Metro have been meeting monthly since March. We're learning from each other, like all of the other areas of HMIS implementation that we talked about, and the other reporting requirements we have with our HMIS data. We're learning how to create policies and procedures and document sharing. The degrees in which our programs change are different, and the ways in which our definitions are different of inflow, outflow, things like that. We're trying to problem solve across those differences. And we're also sharing best practices and trying to learn early regionally before we set things in stone and try to prepare every year for our annual and our quarterly reporting. Beat that, pretty short.
Thank you. That is unbeatable. Thank you for that. That's the last slides? Great. Well, I appreciate all three of you moving through that really rapidly.
I'll just make one note that there is this link slide that has links to all the things that we've talked about today. And you're welcome to click on all those links and read a lot of information. Or reach out to me and I'll answer your questions.
Yes, you go down the rabbit hole of links. So thank you for all that. So just as a couple notes, one, we'll be having a data conversation at our next meeting, so we'll be able to revisit anything that's coming up for folks. We had pushed the staff update to the end, but what we'll do is share that by email. And folks can reach out to the program team if you have any questions or comments or thoughts or reflections around that. Otherwise, Ebony, any last words? We're going to send it by email.
Yeah, but some very exciting news. We've developed a single-page progress report where we'll have all of the updates there, and we're looking forward to including that as part of your meeting packet moving forward. So you can access that a week before and reach out if you have any questions. So. And this, we hope that this tool is not only helpful to you, but it's also a document that can be shared with stakeholders, the oversight committee, so they can stay up to date with your work, our Metro Council, and really anyone that's interested. So,
That's great.
come.
As Liam would say, brilliant. But any last words from you, Ebony? No? Okay. Oh, it just turned 6:01. I thought we might get there. Well, I appreciate that. I know that was a lot of information to take, but hopefully it's a strong foundation for a lot of the conversations that we're going to have as a group going forward. So thanks for rolling through all of that, and we'll see you next time.